So last time we left off, we created this post index component here, but it is currently just using this boilerplate content. It's not actually pulling anything dynamically from our post service, so that's what we're going to want to do right now. Let's go ahead and open up our code editor, and let's go to our index component, which I already have pulled up here. And what we're going to want to do is, instead of just having this boilerplate content, we are going to want to repeat this content for each post that we have, which we can pull from our post service. So if we look in our directory, we can go to source, common, services, post service, and we know we're going to want to pull that in. Let's go to our index view model and import it. So we can say import post service from, and let's think about where we need to go to get this. We need to go back out to common, services, post service. So what's also going to be important, and I touched on this in a previous video, is that we're going to want to use dependency injection to use post service so that we can make sure we're using the same instance of it across our entire application. I'm going to therefore import the dependency injection container from the Aurelia framework and do it as such. So I will import inject from Aurelia framework. I can then use this injection container by using the decorator inject. I will inject the post service, and then within the view model constructor, I can set this dot post service equal to that injected post service, and there we go. Now I'll be able to reference this dot post service and as a property of this view model throughout any method in the index view model. So if I go and look at my post service, now I think, all right, in the constructor, we generate all of the post data. Well, now we want to use this all post previews method, which eventually returns an array of post previews, which can be used in our index page. So let's use that right now. So I could include that in our constructor, but this is not necessarily a good idea. Typically, if you want to call a service like this, you would want to do so in another method. And what this has to do with, and I will quickly bring up Aurelia's documentation, is that you are going to want to consider where in a component's lifecycle you want to do certain functionality. Now, if you do something in the component's constructor, you have to make sure that you don't necessarily want to do it every time that the component is attached to the DOM, which actually, in fact, you often want to do when you're calling a service, because you want to make sure that whenever someone navigates to this component, that they are seeing the most recent data. So you can use the constructor, just be careful when doing so, because sometimes if you use the constructor and then at some other points you navigate back to the component, then you'll notice that your data may not be up to date because the constructor is not fired for more than one time in the component's life cycle. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and use this attached lifecycle hook to call data from our post service. So what I'm going to do is say when the component is attached to the DOM, I'm going to say this dot post service, and again, looking at our post service, we can say we're going to get all the post previews, and what's returned from post service dot all post previews is a promise. So we're going to say then when we get that data, let's do something with it. And this is some of that asynchronous goodness that you get with JavaScript. You can just say use the service, get all of our posts, and then eventually whenever we do get that data, let's do something with it. So if we look again at the post service, there's actually a couple things that can be resolved out of this promise. You can either get an object with posts and the previews for the posts in it. You can also get an error where there's some sort of error in retrieving the posts. And so we should always be cognizant when we're using these services to whenever there's the ability to handle errors and give users feedback, it's a really, really good idea to do so. So at least in the case of this application, it's consistently going to be that if data.errors, so if that's a thing that exists, perhaps in some way we're going to handle those errors. We don't necessarily need to look at that right now, but we will certainly get to that at least in a little bit. So otherwise, we can be pretty assured that there is going to be something called data.posts, which is going to be an array of posts. So maybe we'll just say this.posts equals data.posts. Great. And so let's just log that. Let's console log this.posts at this point and verify that we're happy with what's going on. So I am going to go ahead. I already have my application being watched. So I'm going to open the browser and I am going to use the inspector. And I can see there's this array here in the console that has 0, 1, 2, 3. So these are my posts being returned in reverse chronological order, the way you might see them in an actual blog. So this looks pretty good. Now we can actually start using this data to populate our actual view that the users are seeing. So let's go back to the code base, and in index.html, we can use our handy repeater to say for each of these blog post div classes, let's just repeat that. So repeat for post of posts. So if I go back to my view model, for each post of the index view model, it's going to repeat this div content. So that means I can reference the blog post title by saying post.title. And I should say the place I'm getting these attributes from, if you go back to the post service and scroll back up to where data is being seeded, you can see there's a title, there's a body, an author, a slug, there are a few tags, and then there's the created at. So this is, there's nothing magical going on here. I'm just accessing these properties now that I have them in my view model. So post.title, and then here it would be post.created at, and then by, this will be post.author. Great. And so now I have these tags, and I put 4 of them, but I can just do 1 because, believe it or not, you can do repeat 4s within repeat 4s because you should be able to. You can have arrays within arrays. So we can just say repeat 4, and this will be tag of post.tags. So if I go back to my post service again, I have this tags attribute of each post, and that has any number of tags. So yeah, within my view of index, I can say repeat for tag of post.tags. And so here I can just output the tag. So finally, we have all this content. I can just go ahead and take all of that out. And now I can say that within this paragraph element, I can just say post.body. And there we go, nice and simple. And this is now my post, but it's being dynamically populated for each one. So I'm going to save that. And let's go ahead and open up the application in the browser again. And looks like I must have missed that $sign. Yeah, I did. Kind of looked funny. All right, I'll save that and go back. Great. So now we have each of our posts here. My third post, my second post, my first post. You can see the body that's being returned by the all post previews is, a truncated version. So it's got these dots at the end here. And the tags are being populated dynamically. The time is the date is in this awkward format here, and we will deal with that a little bit down the road, but we'll have a nice way to make that look nice. Authors populating. So this all looks pretty good. I think we're pretty happy with how that looks. We may, however, want to have an option for each of these to actually, view the posts. So let's go ahead and create a button to do that. I'm going to, I don't necessarily want to put it within each post. So what I'm going to do is just outside of each post, I will create a tag here, and we will just say view post, and I'll just add the special right double arrow with each of those. But since I've done this link outside of this blog post div element, perhaps I'll actually create another div container to actually contain all of this to make sure it's all repeating. So I'll just go ahead and take this repeat for and then put it at this higher level div to make sure that my link is also repeating. So I'm going to save that, and perhaps I will also add a horizontal rule to space this out. Let's go back and see how all that looks. Okay, it looks reasonable. I'm not a designer by trade, but that's fine. So for each one of these, I've got my posts. I've got a link to view the post, which is not functional right now. It just kind of refreshes the page if I click on it. But that's a good start. And so now I say, why don't we actually make these functional? And to do so, we can go ahead and just create a component that will allow us to view each of these posts in full. So let's do that now. Let's go back to our command line interface. Let's stop watching, and let's use our generator again. So we can say au generate component. We are going to call this the view component. And again, we will put it within our posts directory to make sure we are being organized. Let's do that really quick. Great. And so I'm going to open up my code editor, and within posts, I now see I have this view HTML and view JS file, which will be ultimately used to view the full posts. So let's go ahead and set up our router to now point to this view whenever we want to navigate to an individual post. So I'll go to my app.js file where in this view model where we've configured our router so far, and let's add another route. So I'm just going to copy this so we can do it quickly. Our route is going to be, so maybe it'll be post, but we are also going to need the slug of any post that we want to view so that our view component can actually render the right post in the view. If that doesn't make too much sense, you will see momentarily how that's going to work. This can be named, we'll just call it post view. Our module ID, since our component is in the post directory and it's called view, we can say posts view. And the title, we'll just call it view posts. Great, so now we've set that up. Now if we wanted to send someone to this page, we would need to tell them to go to the post view route, but we would also have to pass the slug parameter. Let's do that now. Let's go back to our index view. So here we are in our index view, and in this view post link, we can now build out what this link is. We can say route href, specify the route. This is going to be post view as we've named it. And then we're also going to bind some parameters, and all we need at this point to bind is the slug. So the slug, what we're going to bind to that is the post.slug. Again, if we go into our post service, we can see that everything comes with a slug currently. So that is going to be bound into that link there. Great. So I'm going to go back to my command line, and let's go ahead and run the application once more. And once that's all set up, we can check out. I'm going to refresh the page here. And you can see if you hover over this link, it's now building out the URLs. So I can click on that and it goes to the URL, the nice URL that we might expect it to, post/my3rd-post. Of course, our view component currently only says hello world, but we can now use the information that's being passed in the URL to actually render this as we would expect. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's go open back our code editor and go into the view components view model. And so once again, we are going to both import the post service, but we're also going to want to use dependency injection to do so, because we want to make sure we are using the same instance of the post service object. So we are going to import inject from the Aurelia framework. Also, we're going to want to import post service from, and again, we need to go back one directory and say common services post service. We can then use our decorator and say inject post service, and in our constructor, then this dot post service equals post service, make it accessible throughout the view model. And then finally, so since I need to get some information from the get parameters provided by the URL, I need to tap into the activate lifecycle hook, which can receive the parameters from the URL. Now I can use the post service and say this dot post service, and I can use the find method. If I go ahead and look at my post service, I can see there is this find method that takes the slug and it will return, it'll resolve either an object with a post or an object with an error if it doesn't find a post. So great. So I can go back to my view model and say find, and then I'll use the slug that's being passed from the parameters, and then I can, since this is a promise, I can have a function after that this promise is fulfilled and say if data.error, we're going to do something with that error, so I'll just say this.error equals data.error. And what I'll do eventually is I'm going to conditionally bind some sort of error alert message if this.error is a thing. So that should be pretty good. So then otherwise, what I'm going to do is just say that this.post equals data.post. Great. So the next thing we want to do is make sure that when this.post exists, that something appears on the view. So if we think about our application here, this index page where a post is repeated multiple times, this post actually looks a lot like maybe what we want our individual post page to look like. So why don't we just go ahead and grab that content. Let's go to our index view, and this post right here, let's just grab everything in this blog post class and pull it over to our view. And we notice that, okay, this is already post, so that's actually already the same variable name. So if I then open my browser and I click on view posts on one of these, oh, well, there it is. So we've got our post title, we have the time, we have who it's by, and we have now the full text of the post. which is great. We can go back home. We can look at the second post. We can click View Posts. And now we're starting to see some really interesting dynamic functionality, which is awesome. Now, we probably want to do something like if I, in my URL bar, if I just put some gibberish in here, we're not going to get anything. In fact, it's clearly not functioning how one might expect. So let's do something with that. Let's say that if this dot error exists, let's create some sort of error notification. So we can go within our view.html, we can, above this blog post, we can create some sort of alert. We'll just use something that's packaged with Bootstrap 4, and we'll say div, I'll just type it out totally, div class equals alert. We can say it's a danger alert, so it's going to look red. It's definitely going to look like there's something to worry about here. So we can show an error here, and we can only bind this. We can say if.bind, so only show this error if error exists. So if it doesn't exist, this whole thing won't display. If it does exist, it will display. And conversely, we can use an if.bind on our blog posts and say, okay, if there's no error, show this blog post content. But if there is an error, well, then I want to make sure that we don't show any of this content down here. So that being said, I can go back to my application, and if I change the URL, if I do something weird, post not found. Perfect. So we are now handling that sort of error case pretty eloquently. We're not showing like a partially filled blog post or showing the previous blog post. But then if I just go to a regular one that actually does exist, it looks good. So that's awesome. I think we feel pretty good about that. But one thing I don't feel great about is that this blog post here is the exact same content as in our index view, and you know there's a principle in software design, which is don't repeat yourself, and that can certainly be taken to heart here. And so actually next time around, what we're going to talk about is eliminating this redundancy. So what we're going to do is end up creating a custom element that is our blog post element, and therefore we won't have to repeat all these lines of code wherever we need to have the same thing kind of appear in multiple places. So that'll be first on the dock for next time. I appreciate you joining me this time and look forward to talking to you then.